the defining thing was there was a thing in Guitar Player magazine that said, there's a school starting up in Hollywood, California. It's going to be called Guitar Institute of Technology. And
I've never heard of it.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, go figure.
Is it still around?
I know. Yeah, and it was
And it just started, right? It was
well,
like,
it was
76.
it hadn't even started. It was like it's
They're
coming.
announced. Yeah.
Check it out. So, and they mentioned Howard Roberts' name. And for those who might be watching, Howard Roberts was an A-list Hollywood guitar player. He was a member of the so-called Wrecking Crew, the guys that played on all the records, and in Hollywood they did all the movie, all the TV. It was all composed, and you had to be an incredible reader and be able to play any style at the drop of a hat. And the guys would go from one session to the next. So that was a career, was being a session guy. But in the 70s, that was kind of replaced by original music and bands and things. So the soundtrack thing kind of died. So Howard was at a crossroads in his career, but he had been teaching seminars. He was doing seminars all over the country where they'd rent out a ballroom, a banquet room at a hotel, advertised locally. Guitar players, Howard Roberts. Whoa, he's a known guy.
Yeah.
And they would spend a weekend talking about guitar, just 30 guys in a room with their guitars, and I don't know if you ever met Howard, but he was very cool with the sunglasses and cigarette chain smoker, died of cancer, unfortunately, but it was cool. Anyway.
Look cool.
Yeah, and he would say, so, what do you guys want to talk about, Well, we thought, Mr. Roberts, that you were going to show us. It's like, yeah, well, what do you want to know? And some guy would go, well, I was curious about, how do you use this scale? And boom, then suddenly...
You had to almost put a quarter in it.
16 hours later, the guys are all like, oh my God.
We shouldn't have asked.
Yeah. And they would just say, people would leave the seminar and say, that was 2 days. Imagine if we could. Yeah. And so Howard connected with a music businessman named Pat Hicks, and Howard and Pat sort of financed it and set up the structure and ran the business, and Howard created the curriculum.
Right.
And so that started in 1977. And so I
think you were part of the second class.
Well, I had
right?
a buddy that lived down here, and so I came down and, stayed at his place and then drove into Hollywood and checked out the school, which was just a couple of rooms in a studio, a film studio in Hollywood. And it was just like, this seems like there's something going on here. And it was Howard. Howard wasn't really an active teacher so much, but there was Joe DiOrio, a legendary jazz guitar player, Ron Eshtay.
And Tommy Tedesco, right?
Tommy was sort of coming in to do seminars, and then he became an investor and became more of a regular feature of the thing. But he wasn't a regular teacher.
Right, not there week by week.
Right? Yeah. So it was Joe DiOrio, Ron Eshtay, Don Mock, who was from Seattle, just a phenomenal fusion guitar player in the general style of John McLaughlin. And so these guys were all they were burning, and it was like, oh, if I can just hang out with these guys,
All right.
So it was 50 students from all over the place, guys from Sweden, because the Swedish government was paying for it.
CSN, right?
So a lot of Swedish students.
Yeah.
But anyway, it was spend a year just going through it. Well, I realized after I got into it that Howard was writing curriculum as fast as he could, 2 weeks in advance. It's got to get the next unit out because the class is on Tuesday. And so he needed grunt workers to help him. And back in the day, notation was done by hand with a pen, a copying pen. Music calligraphy, and so it was writing out the material and typing it, and then you would cut and paste it onto a page, and then you'd Xerox it. So it was really basic, but he enlisted, somehow, I forget how it happened exactly, but he enlisted me, and...
were you a student there at the time, so now you're in this school?
Yeah, I was sort of doing grunt work, minimum wage grunt work. But I think I had graduated probably already because it was a 1 year, 12-month all-in done. And as soon as I graduated, the school was growing, and so Pat hired me as a teaching assistant.
Right.
And so then I started doing the grunt work.
But let's talk about, just for a moment here, you being a student there.
Uh-huh.
So you're this guy, you casually play guitar, you like it
Yeah.
because your friends are doing it.
Yeah.
You want to be one of the cool kids.
Yeah.
And then you go to San Francisco, you start to see there's, okay, let me up my game a little bit.
Yeah.
And now you come down here. So now you're in sort of the third tier
Right.
of your musical development. What was that like to, how did you handle it? Because now, instead of being, oh, I'll play guitar whenever I want, now you sort of had to. You had to practice.
Yeah,
How did you deal with that?
Yeah, that was the beauty of the school, was that it set up this artificial requirement. It's voluntary. You're going to school because you choose to. You can drop out if you want. But it was like, if you're in it, then here's what you got to do. And Howard he'd studied music a lot, of course, but he had studied learning theory, and he applied learning theory to music. And he would have certain little buzzwords like the small A principle. What the hell is that? Well, it's like if you're learning the alphabet, you don't like say, here's 26 letters, go memorize that. It's more like, okay, here's A, that's the first letter, now there's B, okay? And we're not even talking capital A and capital, let's just start with the small A to the small B, right?
So just little incremental
and
chunks.
you gradually construct these little tiny nuggets of information, and applying that to the guitar, you want to play a scale, okay, well, here's the first note, okay, there's the second note. Now, go back and forth a few times, until you can do that confidently and accurately at this tempo. I'm oversimplifying, but it's kind of like that. So there would be assignments like play the minor pentatonic scale at a tempo of 100 beats a minute in eighth notes for 2 minutes, ascending and descending. Do 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 do. Just do it. 2 minutes, stop. And every student had it's classic. It was called a speed learning module, and Pat was way into acronyms, so that was SLM. SLM1. He'd say, "Wow, SLM1." It was just this like sort of a metal box that had a cassette recorder, an egg timer, ding, a headphone jack, an electronic metronome, and that was your speed learning module. And you'd plug your guitar in. It had a really terrible little amp in it, and you'd put your headphones on, and for 2 minutes you'd play, and tick, 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 and then ding. Okay, now take a break for 1 minute,
Sure.
Now play this for 2 minutes. And it was so incremental.
It's almost like calisthenics.
It was like calisthenics.
Yeah.
It was incredibly disciplined. And the irony is Howard was sort of a gifted, inspired player. He was a studio guy, but he was also a jazz guy, very creative. And he didn't learn that way, but he said, well, I'll teach you to learn that way. So there were very few people that could hang with it. I could only get to a certain point where it was just, I'm going to go nuts,
Right.
Dan Gilbert did a pretty good job. Dan was another teacher at MI.
Yep.
He was there soon after I was as a student. And he was very disciplined, and he went with it down the road. But the thing was, you were learning how to play the guitar, how to organize the neck, how to assemble all the basic ingredients that go into playing something that you want to play. Non-stylistic, call it rock, call it jazz. The irony was all the teachers were essentially jazz guys, and all the students were rock guys. And in the early 80s, of course, the shred thing went off.
Yeah.
And I remember a student coming into, we had open counseling, which was hanging out and jamming, Student came in with a cassette, plugged it in. Listen to this. It was Eddie Van Halen doing Eruption right when the record came out, like nobody had ever heard it before. I said, you guys should be teaching this. It's like, whoa, a whole new dimension. And so you could learn that using Howard's method, or you could learn to play jazz standards using Howard's method.
Because it's all music. It's all scales,
it's
timing,
components. Yeah.
subdivisions, working on that.
Yeah.
So that's universal.
It's non-stylistic. So and he called it the Guitar Institute of Technology, kind of an ironic name. Like, really? you know, but it was like, yeah, there's a technological aspect to playing an instrument, and I'll show you how to do that. I'm not going to tell you how to be Hendrix.
Right.
That's up to you, you know.
To be a technician
Yeah.
on the instrument.
You'll know how to use the instrument to achieve your musical end.